We're starting our unit on environmental chemistry. So we're taking aspects of the environment and adding chemicals to it. What do you think? Section 1 is on the environment. It is made up of chemicals that can support or harm living things. On the next slide here, we have the objectives of the first concept C1. So sections 1.1 and 1.2. I want you to be able to describe and illustrate processes by which chemicals are introduced to the environment and how their concentrations are changed. Identify acids, bases, and neutral substances based on measures of their pH. Investigate safely and describe the effects of acids and bases on each other and on other substances. And describe effects of acids and bases on living things. So first, let's look at what chemicals are in the environment. All living things are made of chemicals and depend on chemicals to survive. So carbon dioxide, water, green plants would not produce sugar for food. So we know the importance of photosynthesis. And without oxygen, plants and animals could not carry out cellular respiration. So that tells us that chemicals are vital to survival. However, forest fires and volcanoes release large quantities of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and ash, and those things are harmful. So there are good chemicals and there are bad chemicals. Many chemicals we use can cause harm. While chemicals are essential for life, we also need to realize that many chemicals are quite harmful. So let's look at the link between the good and the bad and determine what our environment needs for survival. Processes and activities that affect environmental chemicals. So organisms interact with their environment in order to ensure their survival. We talked about symbiosis in our first year. They take in nutrients, oxygen, and water while releasing waste like carbon dioxide and solid waste. This is a normal interaction. However, humans have a tendency to mess things up. So this unit is going to focus a lot on how humans are impacting the environment. Human activities can cause pollution, which is any change in the environment that produces a condition that is harmful to living organisms, especially when we are not paying attention to our actions. Let's explore some ways that human activities can release chemicals into the environment. So the first section is on agricultural activities. We are in a rural area of Alberta, so it will impact us a lot. Farmers must have an understanding of chemistry to produce crops that will have a good yield. They use fertilizers to do this. These are substances that enrich soil so that plants will grow better. On fertilizer bags, there will be 3 numbers that are going to be written on them to indicate the amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So if a bag says 15, 30, 15, it means that it contains 15% nitrogen, that's the first 15, 30% phosphorus, that's the second number, and then 15% potassium. So those are all going to be fertilizers that help the crops grow better. Fertilizers can be natural or artificial, but careful attention needs to be paid to how much is used. Using too much can have bad effects, and there's going to be more to come on this. Farmers also use pesticides. Pesticides is a chemical that is used to kill pests. Pests are defined as organisms that will harm people, crops, or structures. Herbicides also kill weeds or control weeds, and then insecticides are going to be something that kills insects. If not for pesticides, it would be estimated that at least 50% of the world's food production would be lost. So pesticides play a very important role in agriculture, and they're very useful. However, we have to watch how we apply them. Improper application of pesticides can be harmful. What are some examples of the results of improper pesticide use? Try and think about it. Okay, let's look at solid waste. Solid waste. So solid waste includes the garbage collected from households, industries, commercial retailers, institutions, and construction or demolition sites. So if you live in town, you have a black bin that you fill every week with garbage and you put it out to be taken away. That would be classified as solid waste. Some of this waste can be recycled, reused, or incinerated. Most of it is placed in landfill sites. Some of the hazards that can occur when solid waste containing chemicals that are harmful to the environment are not properly disposed of include, first one, air pollution. As these products break down, the emissions can be controlled by scrubbers. And then second, leaching, which is caused by water moving past the waste and dislodging harmful chemicals which end up in our groundwater. And that can be controlled by proper landfill construction. Wastewater is all the dissolved and undissolved materials from our kitchen, bathroom, and laundry. It's also known as sewage. So anything that gets disposed of water that we've already used would be wastewater. In urban areas, so in a city, sewage moves through pipes to wastewater treatment plants before it is put back into our groundwater. So we have a wastewater treatment plant in Camrose. In rural areas, septic tanks and fields are used to store the breakdown and eventually release sewage. I will show you the video of how a septic system works later. Moving on to fuel combustion. We use many fossil fuels in our daily lives, and we have looked at how we take fossil fuels and convert it to electricity in our electricity unit. In fact, we are a fossil fuel dependent society. Fossil fuels are formed from decayed organisms and are actually hydrocarbons, which are compounds made of carbon, hydrogen, and sometimes traces of other elements, such as oxygen, sulfur, and nitrogen. So as you can see, they're just a type of chemical. Carbon and hydrogen is what fossil fuels. As we saw in the electricity unit, the combustion of fossil fuels releases a lot of energy. Or we saw that in a couple different units. We saw that in electricity as well as chemistry. So our chemical formula for the burning of fossil fuels, we have a hydrocarbon, maybe something such as methane plus oxygen, yield carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Notice that the CO2 is released. There can be traces of other elements too, and this might be lead and mercury or other byproducts. Industrial processes. The generation of electrical energy, mineral processing, and fertilizer production can release harmful chemicals such as sulfur dioxides and nitrogen oxides into the air. So both of those are not good for our air. An example of this is the natural gas contains compounds such as methane, ethane, propane, and butane. If natural gas contains hydrogen sulfide, it is called sour gas. If it doesn't, it is called sweet. When hydrogen sulfide is removed, usually by burning it, sulfur dioxide is produced. Sulfur dioxide is an atmospheric pollutant. So if we burn something like that, it's going to negatively affect our environment. Luckily, laws have been made to reduce these emissions and use the recovered sulfur from natural gas processing plants to manufacture sulfuric acid, which is used in making fertilizers, steel, synthetic fibers, and paint. Okay, it is now time to answer the following questions. So I have typed them out for you here so that you don't need the textbook. You can pause the video and answer these questions. Now let's take a closer look at acids and bases. Acids and bases are chemicals that we find in different places in our lives. For example, some of the foods that we eat are acidic or maybe basic. The acids in our stomach are also going to be very acidic. And anything that we eat that is sour would be acidic. Some soils are acidic as well. Bases are found in bitter food, such as broccoli and mushrooms. As with many chemicals, acids and bases used in moderation are not harmful and sometimes beneficial in our society. However, if they build up, they can be quite harmful. So let's look at acids. Acids are something that taste sour, and they have a pH less than 7. So pH is a measurement of how acidic or basic something is, and it's a scale of 0 to 14. Anything that is neutral will be 7. If it's less than 7, we have an acid, and if it is more than 7, we have a base. So then there's also this test that we will I will hopefully have time to show you in class, but we are running out of time, is a litmus paper test. So litmus paper is just a piece of paper, and if you put it in an acid, it will turn red. Kate bases are mainly the opposite of that. They taste better. They have a pH greater than 7, so 7 to 14. They turn litmus paper blue, and sometimes they're going to be referred to as alkaline. So here's a little bit more about that pH scale. pH scale is just a tool that is used to show how acidic or basic a substance is. So it runs from 0 to 14. As mentioned before, anything with a pH less than 7 is an acid, greater than 7 is a base. 7 right on the nose is going to be neutral. The interesting thing about a pH scale is that a jump by 1, so jumping from, say, 7 to 8, is actually 10 times more basic. So a jump of 1 indicates a jump of 10, which means that a jump of 2, going from 6 to, say, 8, would be 100 times more basic. So here it is. We've got acidic. The more acidic it is, the closer it'll be to 0, and the more basic it is, the closer it'll be to 14. And there's examples for you. So battery acid is quite acidic, lemon juice, wine, normal water, and then our is distilled water, baking soda, soap, ammonia, and lye. So some ways to measure pH. I already mentioned the litmus paper. Another way to measure it is a pH meter, which is just a stick that you have. It's a little device that you put into a solution, and it'll measure the pH for you. Another way is an acid-base indicator. So that's the litmus paper. And then we also have just substances that we add. We actually use some of these in our first lab in chemistry. I think we use, I can't remember if it was bromophenol blue or phenolphthalein, but those are both acid-base indicators, and you'll use those in high school. And then a universal indicator can also show you the different color will show you how acidic or basic something is. So make sure you know those colors of the litmus paper. So measuring pH, acid-base indicators can also be used. I already mentioned phenolphthalein and bromothiamyl blue, but these just change color when a chemical reaction has taken place to show that there is a specific pH. So neutralization happens when we add an acid and a base together. They're going to neutralize each other. They're going to make that pH 7. So this reaction actually creates water and an ionic compound, such as mainly a salt. If you put an acid plus a base, you're going to produce water and a salt, and it's going to become a pH of 7. We use this using antacids or potentially cleaning up spills and also neutralizing acid rain. So we're going to get into acid rain here soon. Okay, next set of questions, page 195. We can do the questions here. The next concept, C2, is also on sections 1.1 and 1.2, and the goals here are to identify common organic and inorganic substances that are essential to the health and growth of humans and other living things, to describe in general terms the forms of organic matter synthesized by plants and animals, including carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids, describe the uptake of materials by living things through ingestion or absorption, and identify substrates and nutrient sources for living things within a variety of environments. So we're mainly looking at the essential things that we need to survive, and we, not only meaning humans, but also our environment. So let's look at our bodies. Our bodies require 25 elements for normal functioning and growth. So if you look at the periodic table, we need 25 of those in order to survive. Carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen are the most abundant. Compounds that we use for survival fit into 2 broad categories. So the first one is organic compounds. These are chemicals that contain carbon, and are usually created by organisms. So anything containing carbon will be organic. Inorganic compounds do not contain carbon and do not have their origins in living things. So note here that we are not talking about the organic that you see in the grocery store. That has nothing to do with an organic compound for the concept of Science 9. We are just talking about compounds that contain carbon. In this concept, we are going to explore the compounds that are essential for life and how organisms obtain them. We call these elements and compounds nutrients. So two different types of nutrients, macronutrients and micronutrients. So in general, macro means large and micro means little. And that's what it means here. So macronutrients are things that are needed in large amounts to survive. These include things like carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, calcium, and sulfur. They are obtained from either the air or from the soil if you are a plant. We get them from plants and animals we eat. Micronutrients are things that you need in very small amounts, such as selenium, iodine, and zinc. In the space below, which you will not be able to do, but I want you to recreate the textbook. There's a list of all the micro and macronutrients so that you know a little bit about each one. It is also important to note that receiving the right amount of each nutrient is essential. Too little can slow growth and prevent an organism from reaching its potential, and too much can cause side effects that are harmful to an organism. For humans, we often refer to the right amount as the optimum amount. This varies depending on nutrients. So if you have your textbook on page 197, look at the table with all of the micro and macronutrients. So thinking about organic compounds, these are the ones that contain carbon. They are used to construct complex compounds using carbon and other elements. The classes of organic compounds we find most commonly in organisms are proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and nucleic acids. So you've likely heard of these, right? Proteins, that's going to be a lot of the meat you eat. Carbohydrates, we get those from vegetables, fruit, grains. Lipids, that's fat, and nucleic acids we'll talk about. So each has its own specific role, and they help us survive. Deficiency of any one of these can affect the formation or function of the compound. Let's explore these. So first off, carbohydrates. These contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And in general, the function of these molecules is energy storage. So they're your energy stored in your body. The most common that we are familiar with is glucose. Sugar, it is broken down to release energy for our cells to use. Starches are longer, more complex carbohydrates that are designed to store energy in the long term. So think of starch as instead of just like a candy, it's more of like a grain. It has a starch. Lipids are organic compounds composed mainly of carbon and hydrogen with a few oxygen atoms. So there's a diagram for you. Fats, oils, and waxes are all lipids. Both animals and plants produce lipids. For example, we produce oils on our skin and store energy in the long term as fats. Plants like nuts, canola, and soybeans produce lots of lipids. That's why we have things like canola oil. So you can see that this is quite a large, complex molecule. Protein. Protein are organic compounds composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and other trace elements such as sulfur. Proteins have many, many roles in organisms. They form the structure of our cells, such as muscle. They are the chemical messengers, and they're the main component of enzymes. So remember, enzymes are things that help break down food or help a chemical process take place in your body. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. Many amino acids stuck together in a very particular order will make a protein with a very particular function. there is the chemical structures of protein. Nucleic acids are the largest and most complicated molecule found in living things. They are composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Where proteins may have an average of 300 to 400 amino acids in their chain, the chain of DNA can be millions of nucleotides long, the building blocks of nucleic acids. So we spend a lot of time in our first unit looking at DNA. DNA is composed of nucleotides, and there are millions of chains long. Every cell contains two main types of nucleic acids. They've got DNA and ribonucleic acid. As we know from earlier this year, DNA is what carries the hereditary information in living things. So we've got carbohydrates, we've got lipids, we've got protein, and lastly, nucleic acid. There's a picture of our nucleic acid as we have seen from that twisted ladder in our first unit. Now let's talk about how we take in these nutrients through a process called ingestion. The act of taking food and water is called ingestion. The digestive system works to break down and absorb the nutrients we consume. This is done through both mechanical digestion, that's the doing, mechanical meaning movement, and chemical digestion. So that's our enzymes and other chemicals such as stomach acid that break down our food. Plants do not have a digestive system, so things work a little differently for them. In general, plants take in nutrients either actively or passively. So the first one is active transport, which requires the use of energy and is used usually when a plant needs high concentrations of particular nutrient. So key part there is it uses energy to take in the nutrients. If the roots already have a lot of nutrients, but the plant need it more, it will move the nutrients from low concentration to high concentration. Now we're going to talk about the passive ones. So these ones do not require energy. So the first one is diffusion, which is the movement of molecules into the plant from an area of high to low concentration. This will continue until an equilibrium has been made, which is inside and outside concentrations are equal. Osmosis is a special type of diffusion where water moves through the walls of a plant's root from an area where there is more water to an area where there is less water. Water then gets drawn up the plant towards the growing parts, leaving a low concentration in the roots again. There's a diagram of this in your textbook on page 205. Taking in nutrients in different environments. Organisms are adapted to living in almost all parts of the earth. As a result, they become good at finding the nutrients they need where they live. For many organisms, they live on or in an environment that looks very different from ours. Speaking of which, I'm not sure how many animals or plants would survive in the -40 and -50 weather that we've had. So we are obtaining nutrients from a challenging place in the world. Take a few minutes to examine the diagrams on page 208 and notice all the environments organisms are capable to adapt to. For the last slide, let's look at some organisms that don't move much as such they can only get nutrients from where they live on a substrate. Substrate is simply the material on which an organism moves or lives. For example, lichen are often the first organisms to colonize an area. Their substrate is the rock in their ecosystem, which they gradually wear away to get the nutrients they need. Sea anemones attach themselves to rock where the water is very turbulent, but are able to capture food that floats by with their tentacles. I'd now like you to complete page 203, numbers 1, 3, 4, and 7, page 209, numbers 1 to 7, and then the worksheet you will get when we are in class.